You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers about hikers for everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is the Camino de Santiago edition of Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail. Unfortunately, that appears to have confused one or two Facebook pages, as one of them has refused to accept my podcast post, which they normally do, just because I think I've called it Mighty Blue on the Camino de Santiago, which I have, but, whatever. There's still, obviously, there's some Appalachian Trail stuff in these shows as well. But, oh well, that's where it goes. This week has been quite difficult to put together, actually. Unfortunately, I haven't heard from Beth for a couple of days, and I need a recording, so we're going to hear again from Dave, who's back on trail once more. He'll be on soon. But we're going to start with my Camino adventure, and let's hear now about days number 9 and number 10. Day 9, Navarrete, 107.8 miles, to Azofra, 121.8. 14-mile day. I slept well, but it was way too warm in there. The previous evening, I'd gone for a stroll to find somewhere for dinner. And just close to the church, I ran into Alison and Ruth, the two Scottish women I met in St. Jean and a few times recently. They were outside an excellent tapas bar, so we had a beer and a couple of glasses of wine to wash everything down. We were then joined by Bob and Jackie from South Carolina. Bob is doing the hike and Jackie is his backup. She's hired a car and drives around, meeting him during the day for lunch and at prearranged spots throughout the day. When he's done walking, she takes him back to whichever hotel she's booked. So they're both enjoying the Camino in their own way. I mean, he's making great progress, and he's got a bit of an injury to his leg, but he's still going on. In the morning, I retraced my steps to the bar next to the church and got stuck into the English breakfast, a bargain for under €8, which included eggs, bacon, bread and coffee. I loved it. I don't know what they all don't do that. And I was soon on my way, just as Alison and Ruth emerged from the corner just behind me. I hiked with them all morning. It worked well for me, as the two of them were just that little bit faster than me, and I pushed myself to keep up with them, to put in the miles before the expected thunderstorm later in the day. As a few days before with the Texan women, I was getting a tow. I'm grateful for it, I tell you. Never stand up the chance of getting someone to pull you along effectively. The walk was gently uphill for about 5 miles, I think, before heading back down into Nashera, and a rapid 9 or 10 miles were in the books. We were a bit too close to the road in the early stages, but once more we diverted away and any road noise dropped away until we'd reached the outskirts of Nashera. And on the way, a new geological feature appeared several times, something I hadn't seen before. It's kind of pyramid-shaped mounds of earth. Now, they may be due to mining activity over the years, or maybe they were, they had a castle on top of them in the past, but they were definitely striking and started to form part of the landscape ahead, along with the countless well-tended rows of grapevines. Unfortunately, there were no grapes to be had on this Camino, as there had been 7 years ago when I went in October. Several miles short of Nashera, the girls and I came across a guy just standing there playing a guitar, selling T-shirts and so on. We stood and listened as he played a song for us, and we tipped several coins into his hat. Really nice little interlude. In Nashera, after a beer and a bite, I said goodbye to the girls and set off for Azofra. I hadn't managed at this stage to secure a room, but I was hopeful as it was one of those midway points on the trail. And by that I mean, when you start this Camino, they give you sort of map and a guide of how to do it in, I think, 34 days. And so there's a beginning of the day and there's an end town of the day. The midway point, as I call it, are those towns not on the beginning and the end of the map. I mean, the theory is there'll be less people staying there, but that doesn't always work, to tell you. There was a bit of a hill going out of town, though it was no longer strenuous in my legs. My legs have really got strong. And even though my feet get tired at the end of the day, I've got no problem getting up anything right now with the strength of my legs. And I can actually see the rain ahead as it worked its way my way. And I was grateful to reach Azofra by 1 p.m. I had a quick beer before finding the municipal hostel. And so I was in there having this beer, waiting for the rain to come. Suddenly, the whole place darkened and I knew that it was time to go. The hostel was literally, or the albergue, was literally just around the next corner. And I reached it before the clouds unleashed on us. It was an unusual setup as there were tons of individual rooms, all separated by chipboard, I guess it was, and just 2 beds to each room. I must admit, I was hoping not to have a roommate so that I could snore to my heart's content, but it wasn't to be. When I came back to the room, after working out the lay of the land in the hostel, I was greeted by Alan, a retired civil servant from England. Alan was 81 years old and he had a hearing aid. You know, once he'd adjusted his hearing aids, I could start chatting with him properly. And I soon learned to articulate more clearly and look him in the eye. And he was just a guy who'd set off from home, thought he could do this, and he was the same place I was in about the same number of days. So he was clearly doing well. I was actually heading out for a glass of wine and a bite to eat, and I invited him along. He seemed very pleased with the conversation we had, and we had a really lively chat and a couple of vinos before we headed back. Sadly, Alan had developed shin splints and was intended to stay put for a couple of days. On the following morning, he checked into the nearest hotel. I didn't see him again. That's a shame. He's probably not going to get another chance to do it. He really wanted to do it, and he was so full of vim and vigour the night before that I felt very sad for the guy. But you know what? He'd done over 100 miles, so good for him. But that is the end of day number 9. Day 10, Azofra, 121.8, to Gragnon, 135.2, a 13.4 mile day. It wasn't an auspicious start, with the weather expected to worsen throughout the morning. I went back into my bar where I'd had dinner with Alan the previous night and had breakfast. It was really busy. I still think some of these villages are missing a trick by not opening earlier and serving breakfast. I can guarantee you that there will be plenty of takers for a plateful of egg and bacon. After breakfast, I started my hike in light rain and soon put on my poncho over my rain jacket. I still maintained the 3 mile an hour pace, or very nearly, and progress was solid until I got to what I remember last time as an abandoned golf centre. There were apartments which all seemed to be shut up and houses, very few of which seemed occupied. To be honest with you, not a lot seemed to have changed over the past 7 years. It was spooky then and spooky now at the golf clubhouse. I took a snack of coffee and a croissant before heading out once more. I bumped into Jackie and Bob, the South Carolinians of the previous day, and just as I was about to leave, Alison and Ruth showed up again. They walked really fast, and I had no doubt that after their coffee, they would pass me again. It turned out they didn't. I forgot to mention that just before we got to the golf complex, we had our biggest climb of the day. Over about a mile, we gently rose up about 300 feet. I'd left both the poncho and my jacket on, so I was getting quite warm by the time I got there and grateful to be there. Of course, once I got to the top, I stripped off and I was fine. Heading back out into the country once more, the cloud ahead seemed to merge with the horizon, so I expected to be walking through it shortly. Fortunately, it soon lifted a little and it was grey all around with just a bit of dampness in the air. I thought these were great hiking conditions, especially since we appeared to be avoiding the dreadful weather that was forecast earlier in the day. And to be honest with you, I think the weather we've had so far has been so much better than the forecast has been telling us, and it hasn't got too hot most days either. I think the hottest day was about late 60s, so that was fine. I know it's going to get warmer as time goes on, but it's great to walk in weather which isn't too hot and also which isn't wet. The morning had been epitomised by long sweeping rises and falls, often straight, you can see a straight mile ahead or so. Several parts of these straight paths have been paved once more before returning to compacted gravel. I feel the difference noticeably when I come off the paving to the gravel, and I definitely prefer the gravel. I was passed by a young woman who told me that I needed to be in Grignon by just after 1 p.m. in order to be able to stay at the albergue attached to the church there. I hadn't actually booked anywhere, so I upped my pace and pushed on to get to Grignon soon after 1:30 p.m. There I ran into Helen, the older Aussie woman I'd met, a few days before. She appeared to be the authority on this albergue and went ahead to smooth my path and for other pilgrims who were eager to stay. What a find this was, and I highly recommend it to anyone. It's the church you come to in the Grignon, so you'll know it straight away. We went in through this deep, dark, dingy passage where we were told to take our boots off, which we did. Then we went up 2 levels to register on the second level, and we were allocated various rooms to grab a mattress. All the mattresses were laid out on the floor right next to each other. And by the end of the day, there were 60 pilgrims in this albergue. But what an experience. After showering, laying out my quilt and marking my territory right by the door, I headed back up to the reception space where everybody was expected to help preparing for dinner. I was cutting up carrots while a Korean woman next to me was bashing the living daylights out of lots of garlic. She didn't want anybody else to do it. She was kind of grabbing all the garlic from everybody. Some people were just nicely slicing them up. She was smashing the crap out of them. It was amazing. She was certainly moving. And pretty much everybody who was there joined in and tried to help. This is an all-volunteer albergue, and they organise us pretty well. After preparation, we were invited into the church through a secret passageway, which is the secret no more, obviously, for a blessing by the priest. Now, I'm neither a Catholic nor religious, yet it was humbling for the priest to have come to the church, especially for us. And, I thanked him afterwards, and he started speaking to me in English, and it was a real nice fella, and he was genuinely pleased to have people there. Later on, there was another meditation-based service, which I didn't attend for a very good reason. I'll tell you about in a moment. So after the blessing we'd had, it was time for dinner, and 60 of us sat around and had salad and pasta, passed everything around, and then we all took part in the washing up and drying up. I'm not kidding you. All of us had to get involved in doing something, putting away a dish or drying a dish or rinsing out a cloth to give back to somebody else who's drying the dishes. It was a real feeling of community, which I did miss in my previous hike on the Camino, and I was so glad to be experiencing now. But this was the highlight of all the community I've seen so far. Now, the reason I didn't join the other service was because my Mighty Blues were playing in the playoffs at the end of the season. Now, you know how much I love listening to my Mighty Blues. So by the time everybody was back in their bed, it was lights out, and everybody was nice and quiet, there was virtually no snoring going on, and I was listening to the commentary on my phone with my headphones in. My team were 3-1 down with just 20 minutes to go. I stuck it out. I'm glad that I did. We scored 2 goals in those last 20 minutes and won the game 4-3 in extra time, or overtime as the Americans call it. Each time we scored, trying to get a visual on this, every time we scored, I was punching the air like a lunatic, but staying silent. What a night. And, what a great experience to have been there. Could not recommend the place more highly. So if you're going through Grignon, check it out. But that was the end of day number 10. It's funny how a hike kind of takes shape almost without you noticing. Now, I knew I was enjoying myself, and I knew that the community was really feeding my soul. It was only in the last few days that this felt like home. But that, of course, my home is back in Florida. But when you start hiking the trail, whichever one it is, it will draw you in as if it's welcoming you home. To some of you, that may sound like a load of old twaddle, but yeah, I'm sure many of you will recognise that feeling when it happens. And personally, I find it very comforting. But now let's get I'll get back to meet Dave again and see what's been happening since he got back from Montana last week. Hey, Dave, how are you?
Hey, good afternoon, Mighty Blue. Doing fine, thank you.
Well, the question is, I've got my notes. There we are. There you go. Question is, you're headed back from Montana. No second thoughts when you left. What did it feel like to leave them?
No second thoughts. No, this has always been the plan, and I'm a plan follower. It felt a loss. We were there with my wife was there, both my daughters, my brother. My brother left on Sunday. I took him to the airport, said goodbye. My older daughter left on Monday. I took her to the airport and said goodbye. And then I left Wednesday morning and said goodbye to my wife, my other daughter. Everyone was like pulling a little piece out, pulling a little piece out, right? A little bit of loss, accumulating itself. And,
I'm sure.
you know, that, and I think it's a mindset, right? Once leave, then I had to put my, Freebird the hiker hat back on and go, okay, go back to that life. That's your life right now. And
Interesting, and it probably is, isn't it? It probably feels that way. You're trying to do something that I don't know that you're not used to, and you're not used to not having these people around you, and you become that person, Freebird, who is not Dave Santee, isn't he? Is he?
no, he's not at all. And I think that's the astute observation is I come back out here and I become Freebird again because Freebird has no family. He has no home. He
Mm,
just has steps to take going forward. And I don't mean that in any sort of weirdly pessimistic sense. I just mean that it's a different space in your head.
it is, definitely is. And of course, you met up with our dear friend Hugh. He's such a great guy, isn't he? Tell us, tell,
Oh,
tell, tell us what Hugh did for you.
Oh, absolutely fantastic. So Hugh had reached out. Well, Hugh and I have been in contact on a fairly regular basis since I started the hike. And he reached out to me a couple of weeks ago and suggested about hiking together on the way into Harper's Ferry. I said, yeah, fantastic. He's want to take a couple days. We're going to hike together. And then about a day or so before I kind of finalized my plans, he said, by the way, how are you getting back to the trail from Charlottesville? That's in Virginia where I was flying out of. I said, well, I'm still sorting that out. He said, I'll come pick you up and I'll take you to back to Buena Vista where I was staying where I'd gone up. I'm like, well, okay, fantastic. He had mentioned he's from Northern Virginia, but he still went pretty far to come
He
get me.
did. He
You
did.
know, I mean, that was a long drive, and I deeply appreciate it. So we went out to dinner after he picked me up, because it was still about an hour ride from Charlottesville to Buena Vista. We had dinner and a few beers, and we're going to get back together again and hike into Harper's Ferry together. It was uh, great guy. I'm really happy to have met him and happy to and appreciative very much so of the effort he went to come get me.
Yeah, he's good. He's a great guy. Now, you stayed at an Airbnb in Buena Vista, which we actually did in 2019, and the Airbnb is a good way to do it if you've got enough hikers hiking together. Has that been a thing this year from what you've seen, or is this the first? Did you just decide, "Oh, you're going to stay in an Airbnb because I want somewhere decent"?
No, neither. Yeah, I haven't seen that much of a shift between the hostels and the B&B, Airbnb type things. I've stayed at mostly hostels. It's always been more of a convenience point rather than a luxury point. Although I did find Tina's place, the quarter we had to be the combination of both. It was
Yeah,
beautiful,
sure.
luxurious, and convenient. Um, the host Airbnb in Buena Vista is hiker friendly. Um, but it's just far enough off the trail that it's not a standard jump off, trail point for hikers. It was just a convenience point that I had my wife do the logistics for getting me off the trail.
Right.
And from that spot at Route 60 where I came off the trail, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. You're not getting to any,
That's right.
it's a convenient piece of highway or interstate. Ju-
I remember that particular spot where you get off, where you go into Buena Vista, because
Yeah.
I was thinking to myself, I've been back on trail, I think, then for about a week or so after I came back. This is my first hike. I came back after my dog bite and I got back on trail. And I was thinking to myself, I've done really well with this week. I haven't fallen. And I was only about 200 yards from that get off point where I was going to go into Buena Vista. And I bloody fell over. I said I hadn't fallen, and I did. It was amazing. But
You
you said,
jinx yourself, yeah.
but you said in your message that you mentioned 2,000 feet of elevation gain in the first 2 miles.
Yeah,
Welcome
sure,
back
why
to the
not?
AT. Welcome back.
Exactly, exactly. You know, my whole plan had been to take the first 4 days getting back in, get from that point, Buena Vista to, Waynesboro, and to take what I might have looked at to say, "Well, I could do that in 3 days." I'll say, "No, I'll stretch it to 4," because the elevation gains seemed to be a little, excessive, shall we say, over 3 days, and then sure enough, that first day, boom, you get hit in the face with that, but after that, the rest of the day wasn't too bad. The 2nd day was pretty light, then the 3rd day was
No.
a bit of a trial.
And I'd imagine with trial days that was coming up last week, it's probably a bit quieter, wasn't it, than would normally be?
It is dead. I think quiet would be an
Wow.
understatement. Yeah,
Wow. Really?
it was just very strange because I'm jumping back on trail on Thursday, where most everybody's heading to trail days on Thursday for maybe Friday, Saturday, Sunday,
Right.
and I swear I've seen so few hikers on the trail. Day hikers, section hikers, they're still there, but the Nobos, I haven't run in any meaningful amount of Sobos yet. But actual through hikers on the trail, very few. There's one group I've kind of been trailing behind of like 4 or 5 for
Right.
the last couple of days,
Yeah.
um, and a few random, hikers, but nothing. I thought, I it was like I was dropped back onto a trail that had been, cleaned out of any of any
Strange, isn't it?
hikers.
Very
Yeah,
strange.
what
Yeah, right.
very strange.
Trial days does do that. And so, I believe you're back with a new Durston. Is that right?
That's correct. I downsized. My trail family used to call the Durston because I had the X Mid Pro 2 Plus, right? Basically, the biggest tent you could possibly carry. It had lightweight. Don't get me wrong; it was like 19 ounces. But they used to call it the Freebird Manor. It was so we'd be se-
Oh,
we'd be
funny.
trying to set up at a location. The three of us would get there, and they had their little, not little, but they had their Nemo type tents, and we'd always have to go, okay, well, Dave, you take that spot over there because it's the only spot you're going to fit, basically. And and I
You was taking up the real estate. How about that?
yeah, and I got tired of that and the single wall construction on the X-Mid Pros, produce a lot of condensation, and
Yeah.
I was one night it was raining, and the condensation on the inside of the tent, and the rain was hitting the tent and knocking the condensation down, so it was like hitting me in the face.
Wow.
Not a lot, but it was like kind of raining on me from the
Yeah, that's
condensation that
no
was
good.
getting. It was annoying. So I got the Durson X-Mids one person standard, so it's a double wall tent. It's only slightly heavier than the Pro, but much smaller. So now there is a bit of a learning curve to getting used to, the 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 X Mid 2 Plus, which is 56 inches wide. They can get two 26-inch
Wow.
wide pads in there. D-
Wow. Wow.
down to the 33. I'm used to sitting in there kneeling next to my stuff, getting
Yeah.
my stuff
Yeah.
together. Now I'm like, huh, how do I deal with this?
Well, it's just an adjustment. And talking of adjustments, you've obviously decided that summer is here because you've got a 40-degree quilt now. Is that going to be warm enough?
Well, it's been plenty warm enough the last 3 nights. I've been too warm the last 3 nights, even with that. So I'm gonna hope, keep my fingers crossed and hope so. Sure, when we get up maybe to New Hampshire, and like I may swap back to my original
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
but certainly for the next couple of months, I intended to go with the
Yeah.
lighter setup.
And I'd
It's just part of
forgotten
my overall lighter kit.
and I'd forgotten how close you were to the priest. So did you make any
Oh yeah.
confessions in the logbook?
Yes, my confession is that I made no confession.
Okay. Well, that's fair
No,
enough. You're
actually,
forgiven.
but actually, no, but actually, it's even more insidious than that. I swear, the norovirus this year, it is absolutely blazing and knocking people down right and left.
Really?
Absolutely, it's been terrible for the last couple, at least the last 2 or 3 weeks. Everything from south of McAfee Knob north. Every time you turn around, this person's off trail, that
Oh
person's
my
gone,
gosh.
this person was down. You talked to, oh yeah, I was down for a couple days the other day, and I started walking down the side trail, and I was thinking about you and your disdain for side trails and blue blazes. And I started walking down this point two or whatever towards the priest. I'm like, I got to see the priest. It's infamous shelter. And I started walking down the side trail. I get down a little ways and going downhill, straight down, of course, going, this is longer than and then I stopped. I said to myself, Dave, you're going to walk up to the shelter. You're not going to touch the logbook. And you're gonna turn around, you're gonna come back up, so why bother? So I turned around and left, and I swear that night, I got to the campsite I stayed at, and there was another hiker there, and we were sitting there talking for a little while, and she had told me how she had stopped by the priest and handled the logbook, but she had been aware of the noro and was, handled logbook. I washed my hands afterwards and all that. I'm like, "Yeah, smart move." So I'm in my tent at about midnight. I hear rustling from a tent nearby and somebody throwing up. I'm like, "Oh my god."
Oh
Sure
dear
enough,
me.
she had woken up and was vomiting and
Oh
the usual.
gosh.
Now, to correlate it to her handling of the priest's logbook, 6 hours later, I doubt there's a connection. It certainly takes longer to, not a whole lot longer to manifest, but just reaffirm my skittishness
But
for
that,
the moment.
you know what? Those logbooks are definitely a bacteria minefield, and
Oh
I
yeah,
was very aware of that when I went second time. So I didn't
yeah.
touch any of them at all, and not a lot of people were writing in them that second time where they had been the first time.
Huh.
Now you didn't write in the pre-sub book, but you did. You must have enjoyed that really long down, only to go straight back up the other side to the ridge, didn't you?
It's been a nightmare. I tell you that the last few days come right back on the trail. The only great day was today. Otherwise, each day has been, I don't know. I mean, day two was a hassle, and those climbs you described, and then day three was just you know, a soul sucking. What are you doing out here day?
Well, what was the answer? I mean, are you glad to be back?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I don't know. The answer, days one and two being back were fine. I felt good, strong, mentally good, and then day three just kind of drags. Sometimes you have those days that just aren't
Course,
working for you,
course, course.
and it was a combination of the miles not going, the miles just weren't happening. You keep walking, you feel like you're keeping a
I
pace,
know what you mean. I know what
and
you
it's
mean.
like I'm 2 miles into an 18-mile day. It's like, oh my God, how am I gonna get through this day?
Yeah,
And that was
yeah.
that was yesterday. And I can talk a bit more about it, but I don't want to jump ahead if you're.
No, yeah. Just talk about yesterday now. Then
Well, yesterday, so I plan every day. I plan the route out with the Far Out app, and I do it ahead of time, not just that
sure,
morning. So
sure.
I had the 4 days set to get me from where I got on to Waynesboro. Day three was always going to be 16.32 miles and like 3,700 feet of elevation gain.
Right,
All
right.
fantastic. I wouldn't call it easy day, but that perfectly acceptable day. And so I get started. I'm hiking along, and that's the day it starts. You do, I don't know, 2 odd thousand feet of elevation gain in the first couple of miles, and I got that. I knew that was coming, so I'm, like, okay with it. But boy, it took forever because it was very rocky, very sort of, believe me, I'm already eating my words. I'm not even there yet about the rocks of Pennsylvania. But but, it was just very technical, very difficult. In those first 2 miles, I swear it took 2 hours, an hour, I mean, it was just forever. And I kinda get to the top, and then I'm looking at the map on my Far Out app, and it shows me, like, way off the route I had set. I'm like, "Holy shit, what have I done?" Excuse me there. Um, I thought it was I thought I'd done the first 2 miles off trail or off my route, and that I'd have to return, and then I looked at it again, I realized, no, the Far Out app had routed me through a blue blaze,
Ah,
when I had set the distance. And what happens is when I set the route, I drop a pin at the start point, and I drop a pin at the end point. And I
mm.
go, okay, that's 16 odd miles, and that elevation total is fine. I say, okay, save, and I go with it. Well, what Far Out will do, if not always, sometimes, is when you do an end to end point like that, it runs you, I don't know, maybe it takes the shortest route. I don't know what it's doing,
Oh, how
but
weird.
yeah, and it ran it through the Blue Blaze side. Now, the upside is I didn't follow the Blue Blaze. I followed, so that's why it looked like I was so far off the trail.
Right.
So I didn't have to go back on it. The downside was instead of my moderate 16.23 day, it was turned up to 18.6 and almost 5,000 feet of elevation gain. And so I'm already kind of you know dragging a little bit. It's been a couple of miles that took forever, and then I get a little kind of disheartened, a little
Can,
demoralized. So
can I
okay,
make an observation?
sure.
And it's so interesting to me. Ever since you lost, or the prospect of you losing your team,
Hmm.
you've had some real tough times, actually, surprisingly. You've had things that went wrong or didn't go right and so on. Um, and this happens over the course of a 5 or 6 month hike, and you're just going through it now, you know,
Yeah.
and there'll be a day. maybe not tomorrow, maybe not the next day, but the day after that, suddenly you'll think, oh God, I know where I am now. I'm back again. I'm
Yeah.
okay. It's just one of those things you kind of push your way through it. The trail days, people will be coming back, with stories and more norovirus for you
Yeah.
to enjoy.
Of
But
course. That's what
but
he
the good thing is, this it's not this too shall pass. It always
Yep.
does,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so and you know what, you sound happy enough, but just be aware this is something that just happens, and it's almost like one thing compounds onto another, but you still keep going, which you still are, and you'll get stronger for it, and I'm sure the luck will break soon.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct, and I think I do need more companionship on the trail, whether that means another trail family. I just need more people on the trail.
Sure,
It's
sure.
been way too dead, And just, I mean, to finish yesterday, the compound I made just dragged and dragged all day long. Super difficult day, and then I'm like a mile and a half out from where I'm going to stop, and I, you know, without paying enough attention, skip my way down a blue blaze the wrong direction you know, for about a quarter of a mile, and of course it's all straight downhill. And I
Of
stop and
course.
I come across a sign that says something this way and something that way, and then it says Appalachian Trail pointing the other way, 0.25 miles. I'm like, how can the Appalachian Trail be 0.25 miles? I'm on it. And then I looked at I was like, no. So I had to
Oh,
go another quarter mile back uphill, which made it for a half a mile detour. So it turned out to be a 19-mile day, over 19 miles. I was like, okay, 1.6 to go. I'm like, I can get through this.
yeah,
Uh, and I did, and I got there, and
yeah, yeah,
and then,
yeah.
but then, I'll come to today where I, today it was like the trail gave me an apology. It's
Good,
like,
good, good.
it's like, yesterday, Dave, I know we messed with you yesterday, so today we'll give you today. I had the best night's sleep I've had on the trail. For whatever reason, I don't sleep well at home. I don't sleep well away. I don't sleep well in hostels. So not sleeping well in a tent is not that big a deal or
Sure,
unusual.
sure.
But I had the best night's sleep last night in the tent. I got up, got my stuff together, and it was the best bit of trail I've had in weeks. It was
Nice.
smoothish.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did some uphill today, 12, 1,300 feet, 8.5 miles to get to Waynesboro. So I was in Wayne, I was at the Rockfish Gap at like 10:30, 10:45, done with the day. It's like,
Oh.
you know, it was like a gift, an apology gift from the trail.
Yeah, well, it does that from time to time. Well, look, I'm glad you're back. I'm glad you are kind of enjoying it. And
No,
you just need
yeah.
a few more people with no norovirus, and you'll be good to go. All
Yeah,
right.
it's all good. I'm doing great. It's just, there are days, there are days just going to suck and there are days that are not going to suck. And,
Yeah.
I've had maybe a couple extra days in a row that sucked and it's all good.
All right, man. Well, look, take it easy, and
Thank you, Steve.
we'll catch up soon. All right.
Yeah, all right. You have a good day.
Cheers, then.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
I pointed out that last bit to Dave about how he seemed to be going through a bit of bad hiking luck or karma because, he's choosing to do this. He could go home at any moment, but he's choosing to stay there. He's going to get through this little hump and he'll come out stronger on the other side. You heard that he was having a decent day when we spoke, so I hope that this is about the end of his bad run and that the rest of it will be plain sailing. He actually won't be plain sailing, of course, and he knows that, but you know what I mean. It's kind of spooky when the trail's quiet, though, isn't it? Especially when you've been used to people around you all the time and suddenly there's no one there. Yeah, I don't think I'd like that either. He'll be fine, though, and I look forward to seeing how he's doing next week. So, I heard about days 8 and 9 on the Camino. Let's go back and hear about days 10 and 11. Day 11, Gragnon, 135.2 miles, to Villafranca Montes de Oca, 152.3 miles, a 17.1 miles day. I left the magical experience that was Gragnon behind me, and following a gentle climb to get me out of town, I was greeted with a panoramic view of open countryside that started immediately. I left the last building behind. There's a small viewing deck, literally 20 yards past the final house in the road with expansive views. You really need to check it out. That place, Gragnon, was so much better this time than I remember last time, but that view was fabulous. It was 7:45 when I left, and the weather was in the early 40s, but sunny. The prospect for rain there wasn't. Sorry, the prospect for the day was there was no rain. The road curved down to the right with a quite steep down to start and then a gentle climb over in the distance. You know, I love seeing pilgrims separately or in twos and threes walking here because I take pictures of people a long way away. I know I'm going to be there in about 5-10 minutes, but they're all going their own way. And I realised that this was the view that stuck with me from last time, and I loved it all over again. Seeing these pilgrims a long way ahead of me, but still just going along their own way at their own pace and thinking their own thoughts. You know, we're all out here with plenty of time to think, and my perfect position on the trail is 100 yards behind somebody, 100 yards in front of other pilgrims. I can't hear them talking at all, and I feel completely enveloped by the sounds of nature around me. I don't know whether that's how other people feel, but it's certainly my experience on this trip, and one I don't think I felt quite as strongly last time, probably because I was always looking out for Emma. I met a guy a few days back who'd spoken sparse English. We were sitting at a bar and we had a sort of stilted conversation as he whittled away at his walking stick. He showed it to me and I nodded in admiration. He'd whittled the name of whichever town he was staying in each night. What a great way to record this adventure, and I wish I thought of it myself. After all, he's going to have that to remember for the rest of his life. Oh, and by the way, I am still moving the rubber ring along my necklace map of the Camino from Tina. We still seem to have quite a long way to go, though, even though I'm moving the rubber ring along every single day. Just under 3 miles into the day, I came to Redesilla. Now, I was looking for coffee and a pastry, but literally nothing was open. There was another town less than a mile ahead, so I hoped to stop there. That's called Castillo Delgado. That too was closed. And a few hundred yards outside that last town, the road along which we've been following and getting a lot of traffic noise, we left it behind and headed once more out into the country and the peace. I knew we'd be coming back to the road later on, but the respite was really welcome. And so was the next village, Viloria de Rioja. Unfortunately, her time turned out not to be the charm. I don't know. I just don't get it. You know, these places, they could open just a little coffee shop for people. I don't want to sound I'm being entitled. I'm just saying they are so missing a trick. They got a committed audience will have their coffee and have their food. But I thought to myself as I left that town, third time's the charm. No, it's not. It's fourth time's going to be the charm. So we're soon back alongside the N120 highway, and I grew increasingly and irrationally frustrated by the traffic noise. I've experienced this in the past when I was hiking the Appalachian Trail, and I had to spend, 20 minutes walking alongside traffic. I think this is more about how beautiful it is to find solitude in nature than it is about the necessary traffic on our roads. So I'm not really complaining, but it is so lovely being out in the nature. It turned out the fourth time was indeed the charm. Villa Mayor had a cafe right next to the M120, but it had everything we needed. Coffee, a beer, a croissant and a banana. What more could you want? Happy days. This was definitely our N120 days. We spent a lot of time walking alongside or within about 50 metres of the road. I ran into Serenity, a woman I mentioned before actually, and I'd met her sometime earlier on, and we hiked into Bellarada together. She was on a different schedule to me, having started on that morning at 5 a.m. She got lost, she'd had a leisurely lunch and was now looking to end her day at a place with a swimming pool, and it was only lunchtime. I was actually looking forward to seeing the town, remembering that Emma and I had stayed at a particular albergue, and I couldn't remember its name. We'd enjoyed the lunch so much, and then we'd actually decided to stay for the evening and for dinner for the evening and the night. I eventually found it, and it looks exactly the same. Even the stencil on the wall was one I'd taken a picture of 7 years ago in the thought that perhaps I'd use it for a tattoo. I never used the tattoo, but the picture's still there. So I sat and had a beer for old time's sake. Back out again, I was back on the N120, then moved slightly further away from the road and started climbing a little. I'd booked an albergue near a town about 7.5 miles away, where I would need to get a cab once I got to the town to reach my albergue. I couldn't stay in the town I was walking to, so I had to find somewhere, and they said it was about 2.5 mile drive. Fortunately, the path turned away from the road, and the rest of the day was almost as pleasant as the beginning had been. I stopped in a small town for a quick bite and a beer, bumping into Bob and Jackie once more before trudging the last 2 miles into Villafranca Montes de Oca. I popped into a hotel and used Google Translate to call a cab and book a return for the next morning. And it turned out to be, I think it was about 3 or 4 kilometres back on the Camino. We got there in about, 5-6 minutes, maybe 7 minutes. And I walked past it earlier in the day. But that was the end of day number 11. Day 12, Villafranca, Montes de Oca, 152.3 to Atapuerca, 163.5, 11.2 miles. Previous night, I'd taken a taxi back from Villafranca, Montes de Oca, and stayed in a village I'd already passed through. I'd arranged for the taxi driver to come back the following morning at 8 o'clock, so I was able to enjoy my night at the hostel with a bunch of other people I'd already met, including Kathy and her daughter Sailor, great name, a Japanese couple and 3 new friends, a couple of young women from Australia and a young New Zealander. We sat together and had the pilgrim's menu. Now, this is what often happens. We got an international cast, as it were, but nearly all of us were speaking English. Unfortunately, the Japanese couple spoke almost no English, so they were kind of left out of the conversation. We did try to involve them a little bit, but it's not easy. The young New Zealander was only 22 and was walking long miles. In fact, he got up at 4 o'clock on that morning, the following morning rather, and left. I didn't wake up, and it wasn't too bad of a night. The taxi driver returned just before 8 a.m. He's very nice. It took me the 3 or 4 kilometres ahead and back to Villafranca, where I was, I'd finished walking the day before. Do you know what? He charged me 40 bloody euros. What a rip-off. I've always said, I'll pay anything for anything, but I just hate being ripped off. There's no clock on the taxi dashboard. You just have to accept it's 20 euros each way. I wasn't happy with it, but I know I'm sounding like a grumpy old man. I don't mean to be, but it's a rip-off. I'd read that there was very limited water supply for the first 7 or 8 miles, so I took on plenty of water before I then filled up my water bottle to make that journey. I don't particularly like steep climbs, but if you're going to have one, have it first thing. This climb was about 600 or 700 feet in about a mile once we got out of town, and I went at it very slowly. I've been very careful with this. I don't want that heart rate to get too high, and it never got above, 132 beats per minute. And I suppose that means I've adjusted to these climbs because each day my maximum number of beats per minute on a decent sort of climb has been reducing all the time. So I guess I've kind of got used to them. Once we'd climbed for a little while and left the city behind, the town, where we were headed back into the country and through on a really wide path with pine trees on either side. It's nice to see different views. I mean, I've loved seeing the cornfields, and I know when I get into the Meseta, I'm going to see loads of cornfields for the next 8 or 9 days. But didn't feel like we were walking through a forest, although it was a forest of pine trees, because the forest road was so darn wide. The climb was out of the way, so I thought, and then we started heading downhill again. I realised there was another one ahead, which there was. And that short climb was definitely worse than it looked on the map. But after 3 miles exactly, I was at the high point of the day. It literally was all downhill from then on. A little earlier, we'd passed a memorial to 300 executed soldiers fighting against Franco. It was very poignant. They'd actually dug up the graves of the soldiers there. And the memorial, we were all looking at it, taking pictures and just, thinking about another time when violence reigned, I guess, in this area. And this forest road had merged several times with other forest roads, but rarely getting much wider, though you would have been able to get about 10 people walking abreast along this path. Then, As we started to go down, it widened even further and was about 35 to 40 feet across. And I'm sure they probably always intended to build a road through there, but the Camino must be a protected path in some way, and it's just never happened. We had our own version of trail magic on this forest road. It wasn't free, but it was welcome nonetheless. Now, picture the site. There was a guy, actually I think he was Brazilian, wearing a clown nose, a Gandalf cloak, some sort of strange hat, calling himself Mr. Coffee, and he was providing coffee, donuts, and fruit, all of which I took advantage of and paid him what he asked. He was playing, that was a funny thing, he was playing old pop songs, but they were all to a swing beat, and he was dancing all the time. He was quite the character, and it was one of those little diversions that I kind of like every now and then. The forest road had come fairly close to the N120, but then we sort of kind of branched off again, and we were left with just the silence and the bird song. And of course, the easy terrain made it a real pleasant walk. The tree line on our right receded a few miles, and a few miles later I could see the evidence of quite busy logging. There were hundreds, probably thousands of pine trees laying alongside two giant excavators. The trail dipped down to the left back into the forest for about a half mile before we emerged from the forest into a familiar scene with wheat fields on either side, small hills a little further away, and a village approaching. That village was San Juan de Ortega. Write that name down. Trees had obscured a proper view of the village, though we'd seen the bell tower above those trees. Then a short curve to the left and then up a little, skirting the trees, gave us a preview of another really old village, and San Juan de Ortega really hit the spot. There was a bar with plenty of pilgrims either eating or waiting to eat. I ordered a plate of eggs, chorizo and blood sausage. Also got a coffee. It took a while to come, which means it was being cooked fresh. And it was the best food I've had on the trail, bar none. It was so delicious. Plenty of old faces turned up and we enjoyed the warming day. At the start of the day, it had been, I think, about 41, 42 degrees, and we were now pushing well into the 60s. It was sunny, there was no chance of rain. It was a perfect day, really. Given that I needed to be in a hotel on Sunday for the podcast, I planned my walk to get into Burgos on the following day, early afternoon, which actually is today while I'm recording this. I went on Airbnb, found a lovely little place right near the cathedral. So it's close to the Camino. I couldn't be happier. It was so cheap, which made me even happier. And that's one thing worth thinking about. You know, try thinking about Airbnbs, and if you wait to the very last minute, people do cut their prices. Mine was normally priced at 95 or 96 euros, went down to 75. It was a bargain. But that was for Burgos the day after. I'd actually booked in Atapuerca in another dorm. At Ages, I followed up with another small beer before setting out for the last 4 kilometres into Atapuerca. Found the really neat hostel just 100 yards from the Camino. And that was another great find, actually. It was very, very rustic, but so well done, and everything worked, and everything was in its place, and anything a hiker would need was there. The beds were the most comfortable I've been in on the trip so far as well. So I really, really enjoyed it there. And once again, football took over the rest of my day, or soccer, as we call it in America. The FA Cup final, which is the big cup competition, was between Crystal Palace and Manchester City, and I was determined to watch it. I worked out how I could, but I needed good Wi-Fi. So I went to a nearby bar and ate enough and drank just enough to keep me there for about 2 hours watching the entire cup final over a meal. What a great way to end a really nice day. And that is the end of day number 12. So that's a wrap, as they say. 4 more days in the books and about, 60 or 70 miles walked. I'm now in Burgos as I'm recording this and about to hit the Meseta. I know that for many of you who have done this, the Meseta is the least interesting part of it, but I'm relishing the opportunity of quiet contemplation that this has given me. Don't get me wrong, I'm heavy out here, but I'm going through a few things in my mind about the loss of my son and my former wife over the last couple of years. Thinking about them and thinking about others is something I needed to do, so I guess that's its own kind of trail magic. I can walk onto a trail and have those thoughts. I highly recommend going on a trail anywhere and allowing yourself the space, the time, and the reflection that we all need sometime in our lives. This episode has been a tricky one, logistically, to put together, but I hope that you're still enjoying my walk along the Camino in 2025. I'll see you next Thursday.